What's up, rabbit hole dwellers? Today we had Nicholas Gregory on the show today, and Nick, he's one of the guys behind Civkit and Mercury Wallet. And mate, I've got to tell you, Joel, a lot of what he was talking about was over my head. It was all sort of highbrow technical speak, and I was nodding along a lot of the time, and I was like, mate, I've got no idea what he's on about. So this guy's knowledge around sort of coding and tech is next level. What did you think?
I find it very interesting that we had the London-New York comparison because he was living in New York when he
That's true.
discovered Bitcoin and, moved to London and sort of
Mm,
gave us
mm,
an
mm,
insight
mm.
there. So I think it was generally a well-packed episode, not really a theme. So obviously a bit tech-focused, but like
Yeah,
we covered a lot of ground. So that was cool.
yeah. So let's go straight into this rabbit hole and stay curious, guys.
Very
Hello,
nervous.
fellow rabbit hole dwellers. Welcome back to yet another episode of Rabbit Hole Story. And I've got the pleasure of introducing Nicholas Gregory here on the show with us today. And Nicholas and I, we've met in real life a couple of times, and we've shared a pint together. I'm looking forward to linking up again fairly soon. And I want to help you sort of introduce the things that you're working on within the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I know obviously one of those is Civkit because, you've been quite busy campaigning that. I've seen you in Amsterdam with Ray, and you've obviously got an online presence with Twitter or X with your live streams and all that sort of stuff. So I'm quite interested to sort of delve deep into your that's going to sound a little bit sexual, I know, but delve deep into your Bitcoin rabbit hole and understand how you discovered Bitcoin, Nicholas, and what it is that you're doing in the space now. So over to you, my friend.
Yeah, it wasn't a sexual moment when I discovered Bitcoin. I'm a software. Yeah, it was close though. I mean, I was in the gym actually. So, but
right, okay.
Well, I'm a software engineer by trade, but I used to work for the banks, the big ugly banks, and somehow I ended up with finding myself in New York, and I was working for a bank, Merrill Lynch or JP Morgan, one of the two. I mean, I can't remember which one when I transitioned, but I knew about Bitcoin quite a while because I'd seen it mentioned on Slashdot a few times, but I'd be honest, I never really paid attention to it. And then a good friend of mine at the gym just said, "Hey, let's mine Bitcoin." I went, "What are you on about?" And I didn't realize you could actually sit at home and switch on your computer and make money. And yeah, from then I started looking at it. Now I did miss the initial mining. Where that conversation was around 2012, 2013, so it had already moved to like GPU mining. And then when I looked at it on YouTube, people were mining in their basements, but they were already doing quite substantial stuff. But that's how I started to pay attention. I was working in banks anyway, so like a lot of people in the banking industry, we were very confused by 2008. How our banks got bailed out. So I was already pissing around and looking at gold bugs and questioning the value of money. And yeah, when I got into Bitcoin, it was really that journey. I mean, I wasn't sold on it straight away. I had a few mental blocks around it, like the 10-minute block time. I was like, no one's ever going to use this 10 minutes and stuff. And it was very different than other digital currency I saw. But it took me probably about 6 months after really looking at it for the penny to drop. But then, about 2 years later, I decided to start working full time. And that's like at some point around 2016, I started CommerceBlock, which was in New York. So originally I was building software for OTC developers. New York was famous for the bit license, which made, working in Bitcoin very hard. But where regulators do something stupid, opportunities arise. And, there was a big thriving OTC market back then, built around local Bitcoins. And I got involved with that. And that's how I started building software for Bitcoin via CommerceBlock. And, I think I met Ray, because you've mentioned Civkit. I met Ray in 2014 at various Bitcoin meetups in New York as well. So that's how, we got to know each other. And then I moved back to London around 2017 and continued with CommerceBlock and been doing the same thing ever since.
Wait, so your banking background, was that more the technical side of banking, or was that kind of sort of financial?
I was building. So I was a software engineer for a bank. So I worked on the trade floor on what's called a quant desk. So if you know what derivatives are, options, futures, I would build trading systems to price them or to hedge their risk on them. So, but very much a software engineer, on the banking side of things.
And with that, I'm assuming that there was that introduction or that suggestion about Bitcoin. Did that come from your banking background, or was that friend in the gym sort of completely a separate entity, and it was
Oh,
just for a
separate
social conversation?
social
Oh, okay, cool.
conversation. Yeah, so I'm not a lifetime banker. As I said, I was a software engineer who got into banking. Again, around 2005, 2006, you get a phone call from a bank. They more or less double your salary. So and that was the culture back then. If you wanted to work if you were a software engineer living in London, I was living in London at the time. You get a call from a bank, it's 2x what you were making. So that's how I got into banking. And it's very much a cultural shift. You're a software engineer. You're in an office with mainly men in a dark room in the basement. You go to the trade floor, you see women, pretty women. It's more social. You're speaking to traders. It's a very different culture, and a bit more crazy, a bit more fun, a bit more weird. Code would be built on a Thursday, shipped on a Friday. So
how has the Bitcoin, do you still have contact to the Bitcoin community in New York, or how has that evolution been for you? Because you sort of dabbled into it, you then left New York, you got to London, you met Ray. Do you still have other contacts there? Because I think a lot of them, at least the people I know, they all moved away. Do you got any idea there?
yeah, not since COVID. A lot of people I knew left during the COVID period, but some of the guys that I was still working with them on CommerceBlock. I mean, I would go to BitDevs. BitDevs was a lot. I mean, there's a BitDevs in London, but BitDevs in London is 12 people, a bit quiet. Whereas BitDevs in New York was quite a mega thing. When I started going to BitDevs in New York, it was already 15 to 20 people. When I left, I heard it went up to 80 people, so it was quite a substantial meetup. But yeah, I still speak to people occasionally. I mean, over the years, more and more people have left. I mean, I wasn't there when they had that pub. What's it called? Pub Key. I mean, that's way after my time. But yeah, I met a lot of people. Some of the people that were regulars were people like Matt Corello. I got to know Trace Mayer, who, if you're an OG, which I guess before 2020, he used to be. For me, he was the Michael Saylor of Bitcoin before Michael Saylor. He used to show up to BitDevs quite a lot and come in with his macro view, and I got to know him quite well as well there.
One of my questions actually was what inspirational voices have you found in the Bitcoin ecosystem? What sort of resonates with you, and do you have any kind of people that you look towards when sort of or agree with when you're talking about Bitcoin to other people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say Trace Mayer in the early days was quite interesting because I think he was a lawyer by trade, if I remember. And, going to BitDev, seeing him, talking about, I think it was great having him there because, it was a BitDevs, which is very nerdy, very talking about C++ and talking about low level stuff of Bitcoin, but he gave it a different context as well, explained how, the eventuality of something like Bitcoin because of the monetary failings of the dollar. And, I think before he got into Bitcoin, he was very much into the gold community. So I think that was useful. From a tech point of view, there's a lot of great technical people in New York. When I was there, Matt Corello was there. He'd moved over from San Francisco. One of the the early developers. You had Chain Code Labs there, so there was always a few Chain Code Labs peoples at the Bitcoin meetups. The guys running BitDevs in New York, I won't say their name because they're kind of anon, but everyone knows who they are. I mean, the New York BitDevs is pretty great. If you're someone who wants to know the technology and don't want to do the hard work, you can just go to BitDevs and they do it all for you, which is great. And so that was really good vibe there.
You mentioned the BitDevs in London is significantly smaller compared to the US one.
Yeah.
And obviously all of us in here being European based, I don't know if I say we're European, Ian comes up again with like, oh, we have Brexit. But we're on the Europe side of things. Do you see this as a challenge sometimes in specifically Bitcoin building, Bitcoin software, where that focus is predominantly US based, or is there a lot of stuff happening in the background for non-developers in the ecosystem?
Well, I think there is a big developer community in London. I think maybe one of the reasons it's quiet is because of a certain fake Satoshi who goes around suing people. But you do have Brink in London, which is big. They employ 3 or 4 devs. You've got Yeah, you got lots of guys. You got Antoine Riard, who's lightning guy. I worked with him on Civkit. I met him in London. I met him because of the Bitcoinology meetup, which I think is kind of like a bridge. It's not as extreme technical as BitDevs. It's somewhere in the middle. And also, I've met you guys at London Bridges. I never met that kind of like more chilled out community in London, in New York. And I think, in London, they've kind of got a good mix there, which I kind of enjoy. It's a bit more chilled out. So yeah, like the London versus New York thing, it took me a while to get into because I came here working all the time. But since I've met the London Bitcoin spaces, the plebs, I've gotten to understand it. I mean, I spent a bit of time with the Bridges to Bitcoin guys as well. Yeah, that's kind of cool, the way they go around the countryside trying to onboard small businesses into Bitcoin. That's unique. Yeah, I never saw that in New York. In New York, it was very much more serious. Yeah.
I mean, New York is the financial hub of the world. Every big investment bank, mainly every investment bank, is based out of New York and does the decisions there. So I think there's a big shift there happening as well. But for you personally, having seen both the banking and the Bitcoin world, what drove you into specific infrastructure with CommerceBlock? Or has that always been something that's on your mind? Because I think we can then bridge quite a nice gap over to Civkit as well.
Yeah, it's just my background. I went into banking to build infrastructure. I wasn't someone who understood. I didn't have the background in financial engineering. I mean, I know roughly how to price the derivatives, but I'm not someone who enjoys that terribly. I literally went there to help build compute grids. So if you can think of like supercomputers, like when you combine multiple machines to do an expensive calculation, banks do that to basically price a derivative. So they do things like called Monte Carlo simulation. They throw a lot of variables. What happens if interest rates double? What happens if the yen trebles? How does that, how are derivatives on, say, equities repriced? So I did a lot of that work. So it's just my background. I'm from a kind of compute grid infrastructure background, and that's what I do. And when I looked at Bitcoin, I didn't necessarily look into it thinking how I could build software. It just kind of evolved. I met guys at BitDevs who were trading Bitcoin. They were doing OTC work. They back then, if you go to like some of these meetups, they're always looking for like, I guess, nerds or geeks or coders like me to potentially do things in the evening. Life had it, so I had some spare time. I had a kid with someone in New York, so I was spending many evenings on my own with a kid, a little newborn. So I was happy to just like bang out some code and experiment a bit.
So once you've found the value in Bitcoin, and obviously you found that you could utilize your skills within the Bitcoin ecosystem, what sort of things have you been working on, and what can we expect from the likes of Civkit and any other things that you're working on within Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I mean, the first project I worked on really seriously after OTC was building Bitcoin sidechains. And obviously sidechains in Bitcoin failed and there's a lot of reasons. But we basically raised money and we had some clients, but it never kind of became big, to build individual sidechains based on Bitcoin. And the code's still there. But one of the technologies we built was something called Mainstay. So Mainstay is like this proof of publication protocol, which basically takes timestamps, but it takes timestamps based on the previous timestamps work. And we originally wrote it to basically secure a sidechain. So to make sure that the history of the sidechain could never be tampered with. And, we've never shut this thing down. We've always run it. We've been running it since 2018. We used it in Mercury, which I'll talk about in a bit. And when we looked at Civkit, one of the issues with Civkit of a decentralized Civkit is essentially it's basically building an order book on Nostra, settling on Lightning. But one of the issues of an order book is, how do you prove the order book was what you said at that point in time? If me and you do a trade and there's some issue, I try and buy a gift card off you, the gift card never shows up. What's the history? And the best history in the world is the Bitcoin blockchain. Can't beat that. You need serious horsepower to reverse engineer that, or to rewind that. So that's one of the things that we're using Civkit for, not using Mainstay for on Civkit, to do a form of proof of publication, so that the history of Civkit is stored on the Bitcoin blockchain, but anonymously. So one of the things, my very minor contributions I did to Bitcoin was wrote a BIP 175, and that was basically using pay to contract, where you basically attest data on the Bitcoin blockchain, but you can't see it. So there's no opt return, nothing. It's just like a dumb transaction. And Mainstay uses that. So if you guys are trading gift cards, trading, I don't know, whatever you guys collect, rare sats, ordinals, whatever you want, the history of that would be on the Bitcoin blockchain, but it'd be private. Only you guys would know where to look, know where it is. And that's one of the big things we're building into Civkit. And that's probably up, and that's something that we've finished. It's kind of in the current, Civkit's not live at the moment. It's very much in pre-beta, but that's one of the things that's working at the moment. And something that's been our so far biggest contribution from a technical point of view.
Yeah, because one of the things that I remember, because we spoke to Ray about this way back early on in our Rabbit Hole Stories journey, and he was talking about, well, he was effectively introducing Civkit at the time, and he was talking about the opportunity for anyone to create a marketplace of whatever it is that they want to do, and this sort of free market approach, really, of basically you could just go on Civkit and just sort of like start your own commerce. And I can see the value in what you just explained about doing transactions and having these dummy transactions. Well, obviously, I see it as a potential of exponential trading online by using Bitcoin. Is that something you see or hope for? Or what is your kind of, I know technically Civkit is something you've created, but I'm guessing from hearing in between the lines, and I don't know if you agree with this, you're sort of like releasing it into the world rather than taking ownership of it in some way, right?
Yeah. So Civkit is very much like BTC Pay server. It's just a GitHub repo and a website. Yes, I own the website, but it's not a company behind it. And it's just a GitHub repo. I mean, Ray was talking about decentralizing peer-to-peer marketplaces for years. I mean, he was talking to me about it for years. He felt that there would be a time and a place in the future where you just could not have a centralized peer-to-peer marketplace. I think, he's obviously American. He felt running an American business, he could never KYC and AML Africans. Africa is his sweet spot. That's where he has his most users. That's where more or less he spends most of his time. And he said having an American company would never work for these people because the cost of compliance was too much. So for us, the technology started to align, and there were a few things that started making this a reality. One guy who's not on the Civkit team, but I think his work kind of allowed that to happen, was Fiat Jaff on Nostra. I mean, I'd heard about Nostra for years. I think most people in Bitcoin had, but it just looked like a noddy little thing that was interesting, not really happening. Jack Dorsey basically gives it a massive donation of 14 Bitcoin to Fiat Jaff. Yeah, and the Nostra community has gone nuts, really. I mean, I can't tell you what's going on in Nostra because there's a new app or a new thing in Nostra every day. I mean, it needs its own website for news of what's happening there. But when you see Nostra blowing up, you think, okay, well, that's a place you can put these order books. And Nostra has this, because it's totally decoupled to anything in the world. It can't be shut down. You have an order book, it can be replicated on multiple Nostra nodes. You try and kill it, you're in whack-a-mole world. And then, of course, Lightning started to show promise. Lightning, again, had a slow start, wasn't really being used up until the last year or so. I think Nostra helped. You started seeing people zapping left, right, and center. I think that built momentum. So those two things, I think started to look like this was doable. I also, at the same time, started hanging out with a guy called Antoine Riard in London. Clearly, I didn't have the time with CommerceBlock to work on this or work on the white paper myself. He'd done some ideas. He had some ideas on Lightning vulnerabilities around channel jamming. I think I spoke to him. Could that be used to protect an order book from being DDoSed? So when he was open to that, he decided. I introduced him to Ray, and he basically started working on the white paper, and then he's been working on version 1 release, which I think we're on V2 release, which should happen this week. And then we've got new developers joining, and they're funded by Ray's company, No One's. I mean, I obviously do this as a side thing, but obviously I'm trying to promote CommerceBlock technology into this as well. So if Nostra is successful, I like to think there'll be a lot of mainstay attestations, so my company will benefit as well.
Cool. And I guess the main thing behind Nostra is really opening up essentially the whole world. And if I remember correctly, Ray also explained to us that KYC, obviously the way it's being implemented these days really is the enemy, because if you think about, data collectors and suddenly important sensitive data getting on markets and like rancher tags and these things. But the way you guys apparently implementing is a know your peer system as well. Can you maybe for the, as soon as you hear like identification in whatever realm, people go nuts. Can you maybe explain how these are also benefits to having such systems? Because as you said, we need to verify if the information we've been shown is accurate or not.
Yeah, so the KYP stuff, I mean, it's still very much an idea, hasn't been implemented. What's been implemented is a credential framework that allows people to build like a reputation that can be used in Civkit. Now, there's going to be different users of Civkit. Ray's company, No One's, is a big company. They're regulated in Dubai. Their reputation system, when they interact with Civkit, they're going to want to store KYP information, which would be fed into the credential framework. It'd still be private, no one can see it. But if you're going to trade on a No One's order book, you have a central authority somewhere that knows that reputation. Whereas the guy in a part of the global south, as Ray calls it, who's just basically got a small order book to trade with his local community, he doesn't need KYP, he doesn't need KYC, but he's still going to want a reputation system so that he reduces the ability for other people to rug pull. But essentially, yeah, it's a reputation system that can be augmented on the back end with whatever you want, and it's so that big companies who need KYC and AML and small individual traders have the same system, but what they put underneath that reputation system kind of is up to them. It's up to the order book. So I don't know if I dodged a bullet there.
You have no, but have that all been said, like what does that incentivize people to do? What is the hope with all this coding and technology and work that you've done with Civkit? What is the idea behind it for you on a fundamental level?
Well, as I said, there's a lot of people who want to trade to survive. Yeah. So we do these weekly Twitter broadcasts. It's not Bitcoiners who show up. It's people around the world that are financially limited because they're unbanked. The only way they survive is by trading. And we're not talking small amounts. Like some of the traders we got are dealing with millions of dollars. At the moment, these people trade on WhatsApp groups or Telegram groups. Shocking. Yeah, but that's the way the world is. I mean, you live in the UK, we have a good financial system-ish, but we do have access to banking. These guys don't. And we're not talking about joke companies. Apparently, like in Nigeria, and I was speaking to a Nigerian trader the other day, this is because there's such an issue of getting Naira. So big companies like Dell cannot pay people in Nigeria because it's so hard for them to buy Naira. They work with Bitcoin. They work with these kind of like these traders to basically get Naira. And that's really the use case. I mean, that's really one of the things. But, this is like BTC Pay Service for anyone. You can run a local one for your community. I presume you wouldn't need KYC or AML there. But if you grew big enough, at some point you become a business and then you integrate that. But this is to allow everyone to trade. I mean, and that's it. It's an open protocol for people to trade. And we provide the software. Ray's quite transparent about why he's doing it. He thinks there's a limited amount of time for No One's to be able to do, regulation. And they believe that long term as a business, he can produce, he can do the dispute resolution for Civkit. I want people to use, mainstay attestations. And I think this is a big use case for us, but it's open. Me and Ray could end up not benefiting our companies in mainstay, in Civkit. I mean, that's just one of these things.
Yeah, mate, I can see such potential in this because obviously you're quite right in the sense that there's so many people who are unbanked or who are limited in what they can trade and who they can trade with. And if you think about borders and different banks and jurisdictions and currencies, this opens up the floodgates really for people to really sort of have the freedom to sort of transact with each other. And
and one of the things people sometimes, I mean, a lot of people have tried to do this. I mean, it's kind of known that in the initial version of Bitcoin, there was a peer-to-peer trading technology. And well, there was a lot of things in the original version of Bitcoin, and that got disabled, like a lot of things. So, if Satoshi was a man or a woman, whoever that person was or group, they did want to enable trading in the protocol. And that hasn't happened for a variety of reasons. And there's been attempts. I think you've got Open Bazaar. I don't know what happened there. I think the guy went Bcash at one point, but there's been various attempts. And there's other people building decentralized marketplaces. It's not just us. I know of about 3 or 4 that are happening right now. And maybe we'll merge, who knows? But no one's really taken a leader here. No one's really got significant volume to not warrant having another go at it. Yeah.
Do you ever worry if you look at the past incidents where the state and centralized authority especially has come in and tried to capture different parts of the ecosystem? If you think of Silk Road, for example, if Civkit could ever be an attack vector like this, or do you think we sometimes put on too many conspiracy theory hats?
Well, yeah, I mean, we do get asked this a lot, but Silk Road was a centralized entity, selling things that they shouldn't be selling. Now, I have my own view on what should be legal or not, but ultimately, that's what it was. We're just providing software. Some people will no doubt be selling things they shouldn't be selling on Civkit, but we have no control. I can't stop that. I mean, people will use software for what they want to use it for. We have no say in that. I mean, and the hope. Look, regulated companies will be using Civkit. I know one that's already going to be using Civkit. That's no one's. Yeah. So, but no, you can't stop software the way the way we're building it. Absolutely not. But I wouldn't advise anyone to do anything dodgy on this stuff at the same time. I mean, don't get yourself in trouble.
Trade at your own risk, right?
Well, yeah, it's like BTC Pay Server. You can use BTC Pay Server to sell things you shouldn't be selling. And,
of course you can. Yeah.
And at the same time, look, I can't vouch for every legal system in the world. I don't know the laws. I barely know the laws in my own country, let alone others. So.
Yeah, you and me both. And I think I want to sort of bounce back to not your Bitcoin story, but something I know about you personally is that you're quite heavily into your martial arts, and I want to sort of know more about that. And does that have any? I know. Well, I suspect that you were into martial arts before discovering Bitcoin, but I'm wondering if there's any sort of overlap there now. Because what I'm trying to get at is, I know with martial arts, you're talking about discipline and you're talking about strength and things like that. And I'm just wondering whether there's anything in correlation to your martial arts now once you've discovered Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, I was already teaching martial arts in New York before I got into Bitcoin. Just as a hobbyist. So it's just something I've always done for a bit of fun. It's an alternative way of staying in shape. It's an alternative way to meet people. I mean, now I'm not the youngest guy in the world anymore. Martial arts really, and especially when you work from home, which is what I do since COVID, martial arts gives me a social life outside of this industry. Yeah, but yeah, I've always been in it. Just really a fun thing. As a kid, I liked watching Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. It kind of grew from there. But there was a thing in New York where we used to say, and I guess one of these things is controversial. There's a freeway relationship between people who liked martial arts, liked psychedelics, and then liked Bitcoin. Now, we'll leave it at that because one of them is I don't know which one you think is dodgy, but one of them clearly is. But there was always that relationship between those three, and I don't know why. Maybe Ian.
Mate, I'm not really into my martial arts. I never really have been. But my brother, he was mad into Wing Chun and all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to psychedelics, definitely something I've dabbled in and experimented with. And I don't shy away from that because I think, for me personally, with this whole psychedelics thing, it's given me quite great insight into who I am and my mindset, and it's sort of really opened up a lot of answers to struggles that I've had in my life. And I think I hear that from a lot of people as well. It sort of puts me in a space where I'm able to sort of put things down or think things through in a more clearer way. And that's all I'd really say about psychedelics personally. But
I would say when I was in New York, one of the best psychedelic experience I had was being taught how to breathe by Wim Hof, the Iceman. And this was before the Iceman became kind of like a mega celebrity. He did like a show. No, he did like an event in New York, and he got us doing his like holotrophic breath work to the point. I mean, I was blitzed off my head. I mean, and that was through all his kind of like intense breathing. And he's into martial arts. I got to chat to him afterwards. We went, hanged out a bit. He's a big time martial artist, but more on the spiritual thing. He'd done a lot of qigong, tai chi, and but from a spiritual point of view, I never got him into Bitcoin though. I reckon he would be into it. He was that kind of guy. Wim Hof breathing, it's out there. It's and he uses that to basically do mind over matter. That's how he's able to swim under ice caps and basically be totally irrelevant to the cold. I mean, he's run up in Mount Everest in his boxer shorts and crazy shit like that, and that's all for his kind of breath work and doing mind over matter.
Yeah, it's funny, like people really sort of put their body to the test and extremes and sort of really sort of try and connect with themselves. And I've seen the breathing techniques you're talking about, and it's something to witness. I mean, if you look it up on YouTube, maybe we can put it in the show notes. It's, I imagine it gives you this kind of rush of, obviously, because the amount of oxygen and sort of energy that it sort of invokes in you. And yeah, it's something I've never tried, but it's something I've always been fascinated in. And so you actually did all that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things about Wim Hof, he's a genuine dude. Everything he teaches privately, it's on the internet. There's no reason for you to go to one of his seminars. I mean, again, I went to them before he got big, before he ended up on Oprah and Tim Ferriss. So now he's huge. It's probably quite an expensive thing, but everything he taught there he gives it for free. So if you just YouTube him and YouTube Wim Hof breathing, you'll be there. I'd be curious to see how it reacts on you, but I was blitzed. I mean, I just got into like a trip with it, and after he makes you do that. Like the seminar's kind of split into two. So in the morning he's making you do all this weird breathing. You're blitzed off your head. You are tripping, and then in the afternoon he makes you basically go in these kind of like rubber dinghy swimming pool things of like ice cubes, and it's like going into a bucket of knives, and he's there singing with you, making you breathe to basically mind over matter, breathe, and like you're like go, and your body's on fire from the ice, but it does work. I mean, and you feel great afterwards.
You're not selling it, but I'll say no, it does sound invigorating, and yeah, something I'm going to definitely look at now that you've mentioned it. I'm on camera and recording. It's definitely something I'm going to give a try, and I'll report back to you, Nick, and see how I'll get on with that.
Yeah, jump into the cold lake as well.
Now it's winter in London here, mate. I'm sure there's plenty of deep puddles or potholes on the road that I can jump into and test that one out. But mate, I want to sort of ask you, going back to Bitcoin, is there any sort of thing that, other than the whole coding and technical side of it, is there anything about Bitcoin that fascinates you, that interests you more than any other aspect of it, or is it just an overall sort of respect for it?
The mining thing in the last 2 years has really fascinated me, because when I got into Bitcoin, no one really had an answer for like all the energy it's being used. It was kind of like, oh, it's bad, but we're libertarians. If I want to spend energy on Bitcoin or a toaster or using a kettle, that's up to me. And now that mining has been like a net positive for energy, like people use it as an energy balancer, people find a way to use it for like wasted energy. That's probably been the biggest turnaround, because it's gone from like being like a bad thing to actually a positive thing. And so on a personal level, I mean, look, I live in the UK. I don't see us mining Bitcoin in the UK, although I would say there is stranded energy on the outer islands of Scotland. But I think dealing with local government makes that very hard right now. But I think that's been fascinating, how it's become a net positive for the environment after being seen as basically just bad, but we're libertarians, fuck you. And that's been the biggest surprise, if I'm honest. And it's real. I mean, look, I've done a bit of work for Texas miners, just in my capacity of some of the technology we've built. These guys are basically the last stop on the energy grid. They help balance it, and that's really fascinating. And I think there's more to come with that kind of stuff.
You just brought up an interesting point about the added in a side note with libertarians and things. The thing I've seen change massively since I've got into Bitcoin has been all the different interest groups now, having Bitcoin, where I think the majority are still libertarians, but, you sort of see the progressives coming in and the pro-ESG people and all of these folks. How do you go about these things? Are you the truly open market guy and go, hey, everyone has a place in it? Or are there certain groups, maybe even you go, hey, maybe this is an attack vector or someone else is behind this? Thinking of people like Ripple, paying for shit and stuff.
Like, I guess I'm more open-minded. I don't necessarily think shitcoins are necessarily evil. And I think that shitcoins is a big word. I think experimentation is positive. I mean, I hold Monero. I hold various other experimental coins, and I'm not going to shy away from that. I also think, if you want Bitcoin to work, it's got to be a currency you can trade with your enemies. I did think when we've talked about the UK versus the US, I did think the community in the US was very right leaning. Now, I haven't gotten a problem with that, but if you ostracize the left, whatever your view is, then we're not winning. It's got to be neutral. And I guess in London, I've met a lot more left leaning Bitcoiners. Now, I'm definitely not one of them, but I like the fact that they like Bitcoin because I think that's how we win. It's got to be the money you can trade with your enemies. And my personal view, I mean, I'm not anti-statist. I still want to be in a country with a government and a police. I don't want to live in Mad Max. So, but yeah, I think the regulation at the moment on crypto is overbearing. But I think I'm not into necessarily conspiracy theories that the governments are trying to control it. My experience with the government, and I have been to the Houses of Parliament in the early days, politicians are pro it because politicians are pro everything. The majority of government just don't understand it. And they tend to talk to consultancy firms like Accenture, IBM. They don't understand it, but they'll do 20 PowerPoint projects and make regulation that's kind of fit for banking that doesn't really work for Bitcoin, and it's a mess. So that's probably my honest view of the whole thing. So a lot of the regulation is just lack of understanding. And again, if people want to regulate Bitcoin, I'm all for it, but regulation, in my view, doesn't work. What's your goal? If you want to stop, child porno people using Bitcoin, invest in the police, invest in AI systems that can track people. Don't put regulation that doesn't fit for a certain technology. Yeah.
Especially if it brings such amazing opportunities, like, for example, a Civkit or all of these marketplaces that emerge out of this, where people, like you said, who used to trade in, Telegram, WhatsApp groups, actually now get a safer infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you were to get like any half-decent software engineer, if you were to give them a carte blanche on how to find bad guys in Bitcoin, they wouldn't want regulation because they would say, well, KYP and real KYC is easy to break because we all know you can go on the dark web and I could probably buy Ian's KYC data. I mean, that's just the reality of it. It's not good. And KYC makes it, I think, harder to basically find bad guys on the internet. Whereas I think if you were to go to like me and say, hey, if MI6 contacted me and wanted me to come after bad guys, I would build software to do pattern matching, tracking. I would love a public blockchain to track this stuff. And what they're doing with KYC is really, they're funding regulatory firms. They're giving more money to lawyers. They're not actually coming after the bad guys. They're just creating these massive regulation departments in banks, in exchanges, compliance firms. And we don't even know what's the point of it. It's just funding lawyers. And I insulted a lawyer earlier today, and I'll insult them again. They're not adding any value to the world. We're not coming after the bad boys. We're not reducing child porn. We're not reducing terrorist financing. We're just giving more money to lawyers. Which was that the point?
Yeah, I agree about the lawyers thing. I mean, I've publicly said it before about some journeys I've had with family courts and dealing with solicitors that end, and it just seems like they're certainly not adding value. They're sucking value out of the people that need their professionalism or their expertise in some way, and it's definitely a situation of them exploiting people's difficult situations at times. I'm not saying that with every solicitor. Obviously, there are good actors and bad actors out there, but certainly my experience has put a bitter taste in my mouth with some of the experience I've had with people in the legal system, for sure. But with nearly the end of the show, I wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to shill anything before we close. And are there any other sort of projects you're working on that you want to quickly mention?
Yeah, so in the next couple of weeks, in fact, we are actually sponsoring London Bitcoin Spaces next week. We're going to be presenting, hopefully, a live version of Mercury Layer. So Mercury Layer is an alternative layer 2 to Bitcoin, very different than Lightning. In time, we see it as something that's going to complement Lightning, but at a high level, it allows you to basically create a virtual open dime. So you guys know open dimes, you have these little USB sticks, you can put some Bitcoin on them, you can throw them around. It's a way of giving Bitcoin to people without them paying a transaction fee. We've created this kind of way of virtualizing that. No idea if it's going to be successful. I think long term, if Lightning is successful, it could be like a Lightning plus plus. It could help when Lightning is not usable because of high fees. And we are doing a lot of work to integrate it into Lightning. But from a technology point of view, Bitcoiners and cryptographers like it. It's using some novel cryptography. The guy who designed the cryptography, my colleague at CommerceBlock, Dr. Tom, he's going to be presenting it next week at London Bitcoin Spaces. But some really novel cryptography that's going to be there. It's just a way of doing blinded signatures. So essentially, it doesn't actually know what it's signing. It's just basically signing a transaction anonymously. Can't see it. Doesn't even see a Bitcoin address. So it's very cool. I hope it takes off because is it practical? I don't know. I think we have to integrate into Lightning long term. But that's something that we're trying to get a release out at the moment. Code's all done. It's really just getting it on kit and getting users using it. So, but that's something we got big for next month. And early next year, we hope to have a final proper release of Civkit. Like when I say proper, something where people can trade on. But yeah, at the moment, it's all working on Mercury Layer. That's what I'm working on 24/7.
Mate, you're constantly ticking away of working on something, and I, respect that because that's what Bitcoin's all about, right? We've got to try and get things out there and experiment and build the infrastructure for us to sort of like move Bitcoin forward. And I respect your work and thank you for that. And thank you for your finite time here today at Rabbit Hole Stories with us. A lot of what you've said obviously is sort of beyond my understanding of things, but it's certainly good to sort of talk to you about the technical side of Bitcoin, and it's something I'm sort of keen to learn, and it's a rabbit hole I'm sort of scratching down the surface, and obviously it's an interesting space and something that maybe I'm too old to sort of really fully comprehend, but it's fascinating listening to you. But before we close our episode, we do the All Roads Lead Back to Bitcoin challenge for each of our guests, because we want to prove the hypothesis that all roads do in fact lead back to Bitcoin. And what we do is we usually give our guests a word, a phrase or a name, and somehow you've got to try and, whether it's philosophical or direct or sort of any other way, try and relate that back to Bitcoin somehow. And Joel and I have been doing some stuff.
I can't use ChatGPT,
can I? Well, why not? Why not? But Joel and I have been doing some stealth chatting in the background, and we've come up with the word or the name, Bruce Lee. And we thought it might be an interesting one for you to try and relate that back to Bitcoin somehow. So good luck with that one.
I do actually have his book, Striking Thoughts, there.
What's the book called?
Striking Thoughts.
Striking Thoughts. That might be a clue as to some sort of relating that back to Bitcoin, right?
Yeah. But he famously said, don't look where the finger's pointing, but, in the action of the finger. And I think sometimes with Bitcoin, we get, if you go on Twitter, it does look like a shit show. People fighting, drama. But, you forget the eventual goal is to have currency that can't be manipulated. And in theory, if we have a more stable asset in the world, governing the world, there's going to be, I'm not convinced Bitcoin fixes everything, but potentially a more fairer world, a world where it's a bit more, things are more understood. I don't think anyone really understands money, and that includes myself. And that's because of the way money's printed, hypothesized, whatever that word is. the relationship with other countries in Europe and the dollar. None of us really understand it. All derivatives. I think Bitcoin will make that more stable, and I think by having that simpler, maybe we won't be funding wars that we don't really know we funded, and maybe that makes the world a better place. So.
No, I like that. Thank you, mate. And like I said, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us today. And you're definitely a friend of the show, and you're welcome back anytime. So if there's anything in the future that you're working on, you're more than welcome to come on and have a chat with us about it. For the people that are listening to us, thank you for coming on again and listening to us, and stay curious.